Shalom, Kahala Yahawah, Bashem Yahawashi, Bashem Qadash. Double honors my teachers, the apostles and elders of the great millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect, who are the house of David, reborn again in this generation. And shalom to the 130 Yasharallah, who today are known as the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, who before losing our true heritage, we were known as, and still are, the true Hebrew Israelites of the Holy Bible. In today's lesson, we're going to talk about Cleopatra and how she was not black and why that matters. But before we get into that, let's read this. This is Jeremiah 49:10. But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he shall not be able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren, and his neighbors, and he is not. So, if you haven't heard it about this new show or new movie on Netflix, it's bringing up a bit of a controversy because Netflix has decided to race swap Cleopatra to be a black woman, right? A so-called black woman. Because you see, the reason is because right now there's a lot of identity politics. And moreover, Esau, which is the biblical name for these Caucasians, are trying to hide themselves and their past deeds, right? Or should I say misdeeds that they have done, right? Like taking over other countries, conquering, and basically appropriating other nations' identities. Well, you see, before, just up to, a decade ago, these Edomites, saw it very fashionable to declare their history, how they went around the world and conquered it, right? One of the places being Egypt, right? And you see, the way that history is taught here in America, which is biblically known as Babylon the Great, it's done in a way where you're not really taught real history. All you're really taught is, basically about 270 years ago, or 275 years ago, or up to 300 years ago, when America was created. And the furthest back you really go is back into the 1600s when, regarding the North Atlantic slave trade, when they want to teach you Black History Month, right, in February. But you see, America has no interest in teaching its people true history. And why is that? Well, because when you get into the history, that's where a lot of questions start to come up, right? Questions that these Edomites don't want to answer. And why is that? Well, because let's go to the Bible timeline. You see, these Edomites, though they tell you that, civilization started with them and that it started with them when, they were the Greeks and Alexander the Great, and that's where society, modern society started from. They really don't want to get into the assorted history that, where they come from and all these things, right? They don't even want to explain where they get that term Caucasian from. And that's because these Edomites, these Caucasians, so-called Caucasians that is, they're fugitives, right? They're fugitives upon the earth, which is a curse upon them, which comes from their forefather Cain, the same Cain that killed Abel. You see, Cain was cursed that him and his seed would be fugitives and vagabonds upon the face of the earth, right? And this is why these Edomites, they go from nation to nation, conquering, changing their identities, taking on the identity of the people they conquer instead of destroying them. And they do this to basically hide from who they truly are, that being the biblical Edomites, the descendants of Esau. And that's because when you find out who Esau is, you find out that God hates the Edomites, right, the descendants of Esau, and ultimately he's going to destroy them, okay? Now, that being said, when you understand where Cleopatra comes from, you have to actually go towards the time when Alexander the Great lived upon the earth, okay? Alexander the Great came on the earth around 336 BC and died at 323 BC. Okay, and the short story goes, he basically helped to conquer the known world during the time for the Edomite race. Right, this is when the Edomites first came into true power. Okay, they fulfilled the bronze stomach and thighs described in Daniel's vision of the statue, right? And the dream that he was interpreting for the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. Well, that empire rose because of this man, Alexander the Great. Well, eventually he went on to conquer, and he died young, to the point where he left his kingdom to his 4 generals, right? And his 4 generals split up his kingdom into 4. Really, it was 5, but ultimately, at the end of things, it was ultimately divided into 4 kingdoms. And those 4 kingdoms, the main part of this went to this man here, known as Ptolemy. Okay, you can see here, this is how the kingdom was divided. Macedonia went to Antigonus. Asia went to Lysimachus. Syria, basically known as like Iran and those places, went to Seleucus, and Egypt went to Ptolemy. And Ptolemy's line, when you follow it down, right, he did a lot of things in Egypt, from setting up new false gods, right, where basically so-called white Jesus comes from, right? This is where you get Serapis Christi, which was a combination of the existing Egyptian gods, Osiris and the Apis bull put together, right? Ser for Osiris, Apis for the Apis bull, Serapis, right? And when you go down, right, the continuing, this is where you get continuing, go, right? Julius Caesar comes on the scene, and this is where Cleopatra, right, comes from. Okay, now Ptolemy had descendants, right, in the nobles, in the future kings of Egypt during this time. But the thing is that Cleopatra is a direct descendant of Ptolemy. Okay, and but as you see here, right, you see Cleopatra here depicted as a so-called black woman. Okay, and the other thing is that the Egyptians, right, when they were so-called black, the Egyptians, during this time, they still weren't even the original Egyptians. The original Egyptians that us Hebrew Israelites were under captivity before Moses, through the power of the Lord, brought us out of Egypt, right, through the Exodus, right? Since then, the Egyptians were taken over by the Ottoman Empire, like during that time, and a lot of Arabs had came into Egypt, around the time. So what happened is this is why you hear that story about how Alexander the Great conquered and ultimately won Darius, the king of the Persian Medes, right? And because again, the Persian Medes had basically conquered all that area, including Egypt, I believe, right? So again, there was a lot of mixture going on in that time, and even the Egyptians weren't fully so-called black. They were a mixture of the Arabs, the Elamites, and there's still obviously a lot of original Egyptians in that land. But that being said, Cleopatra did not look like this. Okay, this is and just to bring biblical proof to that, let's read this. This is First Maccabees 1:7. It says, "So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died. And his servants bare rule every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves, and so did their sons after them many years. And evils were multiplied on the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king." Right? So there you go. So when this is talking about how all the generals, basically put on crowns, they became the rulers of these lands, right? And it was split up in those 4 ways that I told you. And like I said, Egypt was ultimately taken over by this man here, Ptolemy, right? And Ptolemy ultimately married this woman, Berenice, right? And you hear about the Ptolemy, because again, there wasn't. If you see this here, these devils, they always had, and this was kind of the custom back then too. They would always take on the same names, right? Like the son was always called Ptolemies, right? Ptolemy the second, the third, the fourth, and same thing. The women were called, Berenice, and when you get into the Bible, you read First Maccabees 1 First Maccabees 10, I believe. You read about this Ptolemy, right, and his daughter Cleopatra, and how Ptolemy ultimately, I believe, married Cleopatra the third to, I believe, his name was Alexander. He was an Israelite, I believe, right? But so the point being is that the Ptolemies were constantly in the Bible, and they were known to not be the original Egyptians, but Macedonians, okay, or what you would refer to biblically as the Edomites, and it goes all the way down to the Cleopatra of fame, which is this Cleopatra right here, Cleopatra the seventh. Okay, she's the one who got with her brother, right? The brother who was the child ruler of Egypt, right? She ultimately, I think, had a relationship with him for a short time, but just for rulership's sake. But then ultimately Julius Caesar came in and slept with her, and they had a son called Caesarion, or his Egyptian name was Ptolemy the 15th, or is that 15th? But then after Julius Caesar's death, then Mark Antony got with her, and then they had multiple children, right? So the point being is that this woman here, she was not so-called black, okay? She was an Edomite, and when you get into what scholars say, this right here would be a proper depiction of what Cleopatra would look like, right? And when you get into the line, she more likely was a what you would refer to as a small hat, what we refer to as a small hat, or a so-called Jew, right? So you'd be of the same people. So think of those people when you consider Cleopatra, okay? So, but yeah, ultimately this is what she would have looked like, right? Here was a bust of her, basically what she looked like, her so-called Jewish nose, right? And this is ultimately like 3D renderings of her. It tells you, says, what did Cleopatra look like? Animation presents the 3D facial reconstruction of Cleopatra, right? And here goes coins of her, right? And again, just another image of her. And I think this just shows you like a 3D transition.
Incensed by her conquests, attempted to smear.
And she ultimately didn't have no conquest. Ultimately, the only reason why Cleopatra had power was because of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, there's a great show on HBO called Rome, where they actually show the power dynamic between Rome and Egypt at that time, and how basically Julius Caesar propped up Cleopatra so that way he could ultimately provide wheat and bread to the Roman people, right? And in doing so, he fell for this woman, and they ultimately, slept together and had a baby. Now, enough about that. But like I said, right, the Cleopatra comes ultimately from the Bronze Age, or I'm sorry, the bronze, portion of Daniel's statue, which, like I mentioned before, it was in the vision of the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, right? And like I said, it all came down to the lineage of Ptolemy, right? The Macedonian or the Edomites, okay? So there you go. So ultimately, from this period of time, right, when the Edomites were, referenced themselves as the Greeks, and they went on to conquer the world, they divided up the world into four, basically, divisions amongst these four generals. It ultimately came down to this, to this portion of the empire, right, where Rome started to take over, and you had Julius Caesar, who was one of the first great kings of there. Ultimately, and then it went off to his adopted son, who named himself Augustus, Julius Caesar, I believe. But he ultimately fought with Mark Antony, and he's the one who found Mark Antony and Cleopatra, committed suicide in Egypt when they ultimately tracked them down and were about to take them in, right? And then, this is where Cleopatra and where she comes from in history, right? So you see these Edomites that are making these shows, running Netflix, they have a vested interest in depicting these people as so-called black people or people of other nations. One, just because of the whole identity politics that are going on right now, right? You have these devils trying to basically please all the people of color, right? By saying they're pushing equity and inclusion and whatnot, but in doing so, they're as this title here says, they're blackwashing history, which normally would be truthful, but in this case it's false, right? And this shows you that we're not here just trying to blackwash everybody, but we're here basically pushing the truth, right? If somebody was a so-called white person in history, we're going to be out here telling you that those were Edomites or so-called white people, okay? But if they were so-called black people, we're going to tell you that, hey, look, these were Israelites in those times, right? Like King James of the Bible, right? Modern society depicts him as a so-called white person, but history records show that he was a so-called Negro, okay? Now, that being said, as you can read in this title, this is not only brought up, controversy with people over here in America, being offended, but people over in Egypt are offended by this too, because even though the Egyptians that are in the land today are mostly Arabs, they still have an emotional connection to that land, and they understand that past, that Cleopatra, they don't see her as a great woman. They see her as a I guess you could say an invader, right, who was ruling over. Okay, so by trying to depict her as a so-called black woman, it's really lying about history and trying to erase that history, how these Edomites came in, conquered, and oppressed these people. Okay, it tells you, it says, Queen Cleopatra, Netflix sued by Egyptian lawyer for blackwashing history. An Egyptian lawyer has filed a case with the public prosecutor to close the Netflix platform after the trailer of Queen Cleopatra was released, which depicts the Greek historical figure as a black-skinned woman. According to Egypt Independent, Mahmoud al-Samari demanded that all legal measures be taken against those responsible for the documentary and the management of the streaming platform for its participation in this crime. He also called for an investigation for Netflix to be blocked in Egypt. The complaint submitted against the streaming platform said that most of what Netflix platform displays contradicts Islamic and societal values and principles, especially Egyptian ones. It added that the platform displayed advertisements that attracted millions of people in the world to watch the documentary Queen Cleopatra, who was of Greek origin, depicting her as a black woman, unlike Egyptian history and civilization. The case said that the documentary promotes Afrocentrism and is widely spread on social media, which have slogans and writings aimed at distorting and obliterating the Egyptian identity. Right? So, like I said, this right here is not flying, right? But ultimately, like I said again, these devils, they're trying to please people, but on top of that as well, they're also really just trying to hide their sordid history, man. The history of them going around conquering and oppressing people, right? Now they don't want to be seen as the ruthless conquerors of the world. Now they want to be seen as the benevolent people who just happen to fall into leadership because of their smarts and their wits and the ingenuity. But no, that's not the case. They got into their place of power because of their ruthlessness, their weaponry, right? And ultimately because of the blessing that they received by their forefather, right? Isaac, right? Who was the same, which was the forefather of Esau, who is the ancestor of the Caucasian race, the Edomites, and also the forefather of Jacob, right? Also known as Israel, who is the forefather of the Negro, Latino, Native Americans, who are the Israelites. Now, let's read this. This is Micah 2:2. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Therefore, thus said Yahawah, behold, I am against this family, right? Which family? The family of the Edomites, right? The descendants of Esau. Okay, that would be all the Caucasians in the world, and even the Caucasians that don't even look white. We're basically if all the people of mixed race whose father's lineage goes back to that bloodline. Okay, those are all Edomites. It says, he says, against this family do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall ye go haughtily, for this time is evil. And that day shall one take up a parable against you, and lament with a doleful lamentation, and say, we be utterly spoiled, and he hath changed the portion of my people. How hath he removed it from me? Turning away, he hath divided our fields. Therefore shalt thou have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of Yahawah. Right? So meaning that what's going to eventually happen to these Edomites is that people are going to stand up and say, hey, look, man, these Edomites, they conquered our lands, they conquered our people, they took away our heritage, they took away this land that used to belong to our people. Look what's happening over in the land of Israel today. You have all those Ashkenazi Israelis over there proclaiming to be the people of the Bible when they're obviously not. They even admit it, right? When you look into research enough, right? But they're over there taking fields that don't belong to them, killing off Ishmael, for lands that don't even belong to them, right? But ultimately all over Iraq, Libya, down in South America, all over the world, right? Even here in America, they took the land from Issachar, right, and Gad, right, who basically were living in this land, right? And this is ultimately what's going on, right? Right now, the people are now raising up and basically speaking out against these Edomites and for what they've done in their past. And again, this is why these Edomites are trying to hide their past deeds, right? They're trying to rewrite history, or as that Egyptian lawyer said, they're trying to blackwash history, right? In this case, they're doing it to hide themselves, right? But what does the scripture say? That the Lord has uncovered Esau, and he's not going to be able to hide himself. And that's why when you look at this video, look at here, 23,000 upvotes and 2,057 downvotes, man. People are hating this because let's go to actually never mind, comments are turned off. So there you go, man. You can see people don't like this, right? Because they understand what's really going on. This is Job 20:10. His children shall seek to please the poor, and his hands shall restore their goods. And that's ultimately what's happening right now, right? All this, Black Lives Matter to a certain extent is ultimately, and to that and all these other identity politics are trying to, restore the power and the goods to the poor. The poor primarily being us Israelites, okay? We're the afflicted ones, right? And you have the children, the generation that is now in power, right? In the Edomite, family bloodline, they're now here trying to make things better, right? Because they know what their forefathers did, they know what their ancestors were all about, and they're feeling ashamed. This is the same reason why they don't want people teaching CRT in classes. They don't want people bringing up too much history, because again, it's shameful to them to know about all these things that their ancestors did, right? And when you call them out on it, they feel ashamed. Then they start throwing out things like, oh, it wasn't me, I wasn't born, that was so long ago, I never owned slaves, or we never did that, and that's the thing. That's when they don't want to be the Greeks. That's when they don't want to be the Romans or the English and all those things. But see, that's the beauty, man. The Bible makes it very clear who the Edomites are and how they would go through the world ultimately trying to hide themselves, trying to hide their deeds. But the Lord, through the wisdom of the Bible, has brought this truth back into the world, right? And has made and put the Spirit into the world so that way this truth can come out, right? He's brought up prophets, teachers to go into these lessons and bring these truths out, okay? This is Luke 12 and 2. For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. And that's ultimately what's happening here, Akim, right? The world knows that what these Edomites have done, right? And before it used to just be tongue-in-cheek, right? It was, it was barely known by the well-learned, but now, through the power of the unicorn, the internet, all these truths are coming out. So these devils like Vocab Malone and his crew, and Dr. Brown and or James White, right? All these people with colored names, they can't throw out enough lies to cover up the truth, right? See, they're the little Dutch boy with his finger in the dam, trying to cover up the leaks that are poking out. But pretty soon what's going to happen is this dam, there's so many leaks going out right now that these Edomites, doesn't matter how many fingers they stick in these cracks, they're not going to be able to hold back the dam that's about to burst, right? And that's what we're ultimately witnessing right now, Akim. You're witnessing the world starting to rise up against these Edomites, right? There's even what is it? Let me get this real quick. Here, I found it. This right here, look at this. This is from today, right? Or yesterday. But it says, Turkish Interior Minister Süleyman Soylu claims the whole world hates America. You know what this really means? This means the whole world hates Esau. That's what that really means, man. And I should do a whole other lesson just on this, right? This is the same guy, I believe, that before the earthquake hit Turkey, he was over there saying, on TV, for America to take its dirty hands off of its filthy, dirty hands off of Turkey. That he knows what they're doing, right? And that's when Turkey got hit with that big ass earthquake, right? So ultimately, what's happening is that people are starting to be tired of Esau, man, and they're starting to stand up and ultimately, talk shit to his face, right? But again, this is prophecy. And what else is going to happen is that these Edomites, they're not going to be able to hide themselves, right? Because people, the jig's up, Esau. Your time's up. So hopefully this video was edifying. Until the next time, I want to give all honor and glory and praises to Yahawah, Bashem, Yahawashi, Bashem, Qadash, the waters, my teachers, the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and mercy to the elect. Shalom.